going to, in case you weren't here last week, or in case you've forgotten already, I just want to give you the very quick kind of version of what we spoke about last week in our sermon time, our teaching time. And John writes in the very first verse of his gospel, he tells us that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And what we said is, as much as we think about Christmas, we tend to focus on other Gospels, Matthew and Luke, and they sort of give us a more complete narrative of the events leading up to the birth of Jesus. What we said last week is that we have to understand that John has a Christmas story. It's just not the type of Christmas story that we're used to. And John, in fact, in one verse, answers for us one of the very important questions of Christmas. One of the questions that the other writers ask, that we ask, that people are asking today. And his question is simply, who was this baby that was born? And why is this event that took place so important? Why is it a big deal? Why is it that thousands of years later, we're still talking about this child that was born into a manger? And that's one of the key Christmas questions. And the truth of the matter is that there's other babies born in the same night that Jesus was born. There's other thousands, of course, babies born after the time Jesus has been born. But it seems to be that we just fixate on this date, and people all around the world celebrate Christmas. And they celebrate it for different reasons, but many people celebrate Christmas because we recognize and realize that it was the birth of Jesus, or the day that we celebrate the birth of Jesus. So why? Why is it such a big deal? And John answers that for us in the very first verse. He says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is why this is such a big deal, John is saying, because eternal God since the beginning of time, God since before time existed, the eternal God has stepped into, has come into, is now a part of our worlds. And that is a big deal. And so even though there's no angels or shepherds or King Herod or even Mary or Joseph in John's story, John is still telling us the story of Christmas just from a different point of view. And he says this is a big deal because the eternal God at this moment in history stepped into your world and stepped into my world. That is why thousands of years later we still celebrate. That is why thousands of years later, in Advent Sundays, we still talk about this. That is why churches across different denominations with even different beliefs come together at Christmas to talk about this baby that was born. And so in John this morning, I want us to look at another verse. And this is a little bit down further. And I would love for you to just turn there and look at John in verse 1. And verse 14, this is what it says. John 1:14 says this. And the Word, and so going back to verse 1, John is saying the very same person that I was talking about at the beginning of my gospel, the Word became flesh. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we saw His glory, the glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and full of truth. And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning, is that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And what I just want to mention here is that from the point of view of John's readers, this is an extremely unique thing that he's talking about. Because in John's time, nobody believed in a singular God. Nobody believed that there was one God that ruled over everything. And in fact, the dominant point of view in John's time was Greek mythology. And so they believed in all sorts of gods. They believed in Zeus, they believed in Poseidon, they believed in all sorts of different gods that lived up in the heavens. And their thinking, what they thought about these gods was very different than what John presents to us. They believed that the gods were always fighting, that they each had power, that they had different type of power, and that there were always wars warring with one another. They're always fighting back and forth. And so Zeus might be at war with the god of the sea, Poseidon. And so they were just always going back and forth. They also believed, and if you read a lot of Greek mythology, or you're familiar with some of the stories that you don't even realize are come from there, or based out of Greek mythology. The other thing they believed is that these gods toyed with human beings. In other words, they are extremely powerful, and they sort of rule over the earth, and on earth is just these puny little human beings that can be manipulated and can be toyed with and just used to their own advantage and just sort of at the whim of the god. They believe that they just took advantage of the humans. And so the worship of these different gods was based on really fear. You prayed to such and such a god because if you didn't, you were afraid that they would do something to you, that they would, make your crops not grow. And so you offered offerings to different gods, depending on what city you lived in or what you believed, because you were afraid that if you didn't, they would be angry with you. And so you're hoping to appease them, you're hoping to make them happy, you're hoping to do something that will put you kind of in step and in good with the particular God that you believed in. That was the dominating, predominant view of John's time, of much of the New Testament. And so we have multiple gods, and the people of John's time believed that those gods just sort of saw human beings as something to be toyed with, something to be manipulated, something to be taken advantage of if they could, just whenever they felt like it. And John presents to us something different about the God that he's talking about the God of the Bible. And the first thing that he says is that the God of the Bible is a singular God. That there's not multiple gods, but that there's one God that rules over everything, that has been since the beginning of time. He calls him the Word. And he also says this, and this is really, really interesting. He says that this God chose to come and to dwell among men. Now, you have to understand, again, the perspective of John's readers. Why would a God willingly choose to come and dwell among simple, pathetic, puny little humans? It's absolutely unique. And John is saying that this God that he talks about in the first verse, this God that he comes back around to in verse 14, came and dwelt among men. And from their perspective, that is absolutely mind-blowing that any God would choose to do that. And it's very interesting in that verse, and again, just if you have your Bibles, just open up there, as there's something in the language that is we're missing kind of in the English translation that is so cool. Verse 14, let me just read it again. It says, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us." The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Now, it doesn't bring out exactly what John is trying to say in that verse. In the language of our New Testament, as they've translated it from Greek into English, the word that John uses can be translated differently. And this is what John is saying. This is a more kind of literal translation of that phrase, "and dwelt among us." John is saying that Jesus, the Word, came and pitched his tent, or camped out. In fact, the very, very literal translation is kind of cool. John is saying that Jesus came, the Word came, and it says he tabernacled among us. The Word came and tabernacled among us. And what John is trying to do is point us back to the Old Testament. And just very quickly, let me give you a history here of the tabernacle, and you may be familiar with this. But as God's people were leaving Egypt, as God's people were walking across the desert, God told them different things. He gave them different things. But one of the things that he wanted them to do was to build a tabernacle. And a tabernacle was just a tent. But this tent had a very specific purpose. And the purpose was to dwell, or was to be a dwelling place, or to house the presence of God. And so when Israel moved, the tabernacle moved with them. And usually the tabernacle was in the center of the encampment, and at times Moses would go there to meet with God, but all of Israel understood that the tabernacle was housing the presence of God, which was with them. Now, as time went on, and they entered into the land, and they conquered the land, the tabernacle was replaced with what? You guys know this. The temple. Yeah, the tabernacle was a temporary arrangement. As they conquered the land, they instead built a temple that was to house the presence of God. And it was more permanent than a tent would have been, of course. And so this time went on, but as Israel went through their history, as you know the story, they didn't always follow God. They didn't always worship God as they would have, should have worshipped God, or as God would have wanted them to worship Him. At times they went astray and they began worshiping other gods. All the meanwhile, still going to the temple and giving a sacrifice, giving a tithe, doing this, doing that, but also worshiping other gods. So it's kind of like a dual thing going on there. And in the book of Ezekiel, there's a very, very sad vision that Ezekiel has, a very, very sad story that Ezekiel tells. And the story is that of the presence of God, which was housed in the temple, leaving the temple. Things had gotten so bad, the people were so far from God, that the presence of God was no longer going to reside in that temple. And in the story, what again is just such a sad part of the story, is that God's presence left the temple, and the people didn't even notice. It's like, they just kept on going like they always had gone, and doing what they always had done. And so God's presence is gone from that place where they're supposed to be worshiping. But they were so far from God that they didn't even notice that when they showed up, that He was no longer there. And we're getting to the key point here in just a second. See, one of the things about Israel that we have to understand that made them unique and that made them different than all the other nations, than all the peoples of their times, which had their own gods that they worship, is that God's people were always supposed to be a people of the presence of God. In other words, that God was not some cosmic big guy up there that just kind of looked down and sort of saw everything that was going on and tweaked this and tweaked that when it needed to be tweaked. That was not the vision that they were supposed to have of God. But God was in their midst. That God was a people. They were supposed to be a people where the presence of God was with them at all times. And so when they moved, God moved. When they went across the desert, God went with them. When they were in when God's presence was in the temple, they were a people where the presence of God was on earth with them, not just in some sky somewhere. That was God's vision for the children of Israel. But because of their sin, that was lost. Because of their sin, the presence of God departed. And I think it would be fair to say that there was a time in history where the people of God, Israel, were no longer marked, or no longer a people marked by the presence of God. Because they were so far that God had departed. Now this is what's cool about John. Okay, so we're getting back to John here. This is what's cool about that verse. John says that the Word became flesh. The Word took on human form. Jesus took on human form. And He says that He tabernacled among us. What that means is that the world, what that means is that God's presence would once again dwell in human form with people like it had in the Old Testament. That He pitched His tent, that He camped out, that He came to live amongst us, that He came in many ways to be like us. What that means is that the What that means is that very same God took on human flesh and was a God that became hungry. That was a God that needed nourishment. Was a God that after an exhausting day of ministry became tired physically. That the God of the universe made it, or at least enabled himself to be killable. And he was. He became vulnerable when he came and pitched his tents, or camped out, or tabernacled among us. John is saying the Word became flesh and came and dwelt among us, became part of us, went in our circles, came to find us where we were at, where we had our deepest and our greatest need. And once again, for a time of Jesus' ministry, the world would be marked by the presence of eternal God among us. Let me just try to give you an illustration about how I sort of see this playing out. And it may help you connect some of the dots. How many people here have a dog? Put up your hand if you have a dog. A few of you. How many people have a cat? Put up your hand if you have a cat. Barb? No? Okay. Look, a few dog people, a few cat people. We have a cat. It's an all-black cat. That's probably not good, is it? Anyway, isn't that bad luck or something like that? Okay, anyway. We have a cat. It's an all-black cat. And it's kind of great sometimes, but other times it can just really be annoying. Kind of like kids in that way. So we'll be sitting, Nicole and I, or maybe me and one of the kids, we'll be sitting on the couch, and the cat decides that it wants some attention. And if you have a dog, dogs are like this, and if you have a kid, kids can be like this at times. And so the cat will jump up on the couch, or try to jump up on our lap, and make it itself at home. But the thing is, you don't always want the cat on your lap. And you don't always want the cat near you. And sometimes what we'll do, and this may disturb you, is we'll just give the cat the boot. If you really love animals, you're just like, oh, how could you do that? It's so cute. So we're just like, get out of here, cat. We don't want you up on our lap, up on our couch, whatever it is right now. But the thing is, and I think a lot of animals are like this, cats can be really, really persistent. And so it's not like he just, get thrown on the floor and he's like, okay, I'll try again in a few minutes. And in fact, at times, he'll just jump right back up again. And then you throw him on the floor, and a couple of minutes later, just jump right back up again. And cats can be really, really persistent. And here's the point. You're wondering where this is going. I am a little bit too, but anyway. Here's the point. It's kind of like how God sees our world. And there was a point in human history where God was with his people, and time and time again, man sort of just gave God like the stiff arm and said, you know what, we don't want you. We don't need you. We don't need you to be with us. We don't need you to be a part of us. No offense, but we're not really interested. No offense, but I don't need you walking with me every day. No offense, but I think I'm a pretty good person. And it's like God is kind of just standing there, and in time again, man has just kind of stepped back and said, thank you, but no thank you. And God's perspective is simply this. He is not angry. He is not forceful, but he is persistent. He is persistent. And time again, in the course of history, man has said, God, we don't really need you in our world, but God shows up anyway. And time again, in your life and in my life, we're like, God, we don't really need you, thank you, but we got other things, other priorities, other things on our schedule, other things that require time. And so God is just kind of standing there waiting, and he's not forceful. He won't force his way into your life, into my life, and he's not angry, but he is persistent. And at this point in history, as we think about Christmas, once again, the God that had been tossed aside by Israel that have been said, we don't really need you. We're more interested in the gods of the Canaanites. We'll worship them instead. And so, for a time, he disappeared. Not completely, but that's a longer story to get into. But then again, here on the Christmas celebration, on the night of his birth, the God shows up in human flesh. He is back because he is persistent. And he dwelt, or tabernacled, or pitched his tents, came to live among us. Among you. Among me. This is kind of what I would love for you to get this morning. So if you've forgotten already everything I've said, just hang on to this, okay? This is so important. The Christmas story, the key of the Christmas story is that God has drawn near. That God has drawn near to a people that have withdrawn from him. That the Son of God, Jesus, the Word, has drawn near at Christmas to a humanity, to a group of people that time and time and time again have said, you know what, we really don't want you in our life. God has drawn near to people that have withdrawn from him. And isn't that good news? I mean, you talk about why Christmas is good news, and talks about in the passage of Luke we read about how it is good news. It's good news because God has drawn near to humanity, to a group of people that time and time again have said, we really don't want you as part of our life. And then there are moments in your life, and there are moments in my life where we're frustrated. There are moments in your life, you can think of your past, maybe certainly before you were a Christian or a believer. Maybe you're not even a Christian or a believer right now. But there are moments where you are far from God, where you have withdrawn, where you said, I don't really want any part of church, any part of religion, any part of Jesus, any part of this. But guess what? God is near to you. And once again, he won't be forceful. He won't force his way into your life. He won't force you to go to church. He won't force you to do this. He won't force you to do that. But he will be persistent. Just if you're still in John 1, back up a couple verses to what we read there. This is a key verse. John 1 in verse 11 says this. It says he came to his own, in other words, Israel. The people that had cast him aside, the people that had turned from following and worshiping their God. It says he came to his own, and his own did not receive him. He came to his own, but they said again, no, thank you, but no, thank you. They didn't really want it as a kind of a general rule. Of course, there were people that believed and people that followed, but they didn't want to have any part of Jesus as their king. He came to his own, but they received him not. And this is really the message of Christmas, the message of salvation. John says, but as many as received him, to him he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name. In other words, his own people, Israel, they rejected him. They didn't want anything to do with him, but to those who did believe, but to those who did call upon his name, that to those who believed that he was the Messiah, he gave them the right to become the children of God, to those who believed in his name. In the coming of Jesus, in the Word, the Jesus who became flesh, what was once, what I'm going to say is audio to us, became visual as well. I remember growing up, we used to spend some of the weekends at my grandmother's house, and she was a couple hours outside of Toronto. And this is way back in the 60s. No, it's not. Back in, the 90s or something. And so I remember, being in her house, and this is before the days where cable television showed all of the sports games and stuff. And so I remember being there on the weekends, and the Blue Jays would be playing in Toronto, a couple hours away, and she had a little radio. And I'd sit there, and there's no internet. I mean, there's poverty back then. I mean, it's just terrible. And you couldn't figure out what channel it was on, but I remember sitting there fiddling with that little radio and trying to find the station that was broadcasting the Toronto Blue Jays game. So I'd fiddle back and forth, and like, oh, that was it, and like, no, then, it'd be kind of staticky, and it would cut in and cut out, and so you'd sit there, and eventually you might find it, and you'd sit there and you'd listen, and they'd be describing it, and the announcers, one of their gifts, the broadcasters, is to make you feel, even though you're not there, but they just had a way of making you feel like you were at the game. And they described things in a way that, you couldn't see them, you felt like you could. That's the gift of a radio broadcast. And so the thing is, that was, at the time, the best that could happen. But there's, on a couple of occasions, we had a chance to go and to see a game live. And here's the thing, live is better than the radio, isn't it? Because somebody can tell you something, and somebody can describe something to you, but in a lot of cases, until you are there, until you are, in the building, and until you are a part of that, it just, when you see it, it just sort of completely changes your perspective. It's like, wow, I didn't realize that the stadium was so big, or wow, I didn't realize the beauty of this area or this place. And it's like a trip. Imagine somebody that goes on a trip, and they go through the mountains or something, and they come back, and they show you maybe some pictures. That's good. Maybe they're just describing in detail what they saw with their own eyes. But if you were to take that same trip through that same area, through the mountains or something like that, you would likely say, wow, it is better than I even imagined. And something that you've been told about that looks completely different when you can see it with your own eyes. And in the coming of Jesus, what we have in the Old Testament are a picture of God, which is helpful, and we need to explore that. But in the coming of Jesus, what we have is completely different. We get a clear picture, a deeper understanding, because now we can lay eyes on God. Now we can see it in action. Now, instead of just telling us what the love of God looks like, we can see it displayed time and time and time and time again through the ministry of Jesus. And at the coming of Jesus, what was once audio for us, we could just see or read. You think about God in the Old Testament. A lot of the conversations were like, well, God talked to people. That would be so cool. And if that happened to me, I would certainly believe. Oh, yeah. A lot of those conversations were very one-sided. In other words, it's not like people just got to ask God questions, and God was like, yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, I can answer. In other words, God talked to them. They didn't always get to talk back. Think about Abraham. Wouldn't it be nice to just talk and fellowship with God like Abraham did? Abraham heard from God like in conversation, I think it's like once every 30 or 40 years. Like he would have a conversation with God. God did most of the talking. And it might be 30, 40, 50, maybe 60 years before God ever spoke to Abraham in that way again. But in the person of Jesus, what was once just audio for us, now we can see. We have a clear picture of what Jesus is like. Because love is demonstrated. Forgiveness is demonstrated. Kindness is demonstrated. So sometimes people even get thrown off by the Old Testament. They're like, there's some confusing things in there about God. And yes, that is true. And yes, we need to take the time to sort through those things. But you just say to people, look, the clearest picture of God that you will have is through Jesus. So focus on the ministry and testimony of Jesus Christ. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, or tabernacled among us. We need to bring that language back at weddings, don't we? You want to, okay, I'm going to sort of wind up here, or wind down, I guess I should say. You want a clear picture of somebody? Try spending 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with them. Like, you want to know what somebody is really like? Just move into that dorm room with those 4 other girls. You want to know what somebody is like? Share a dorm room with that guy. You're around them all the time. You want to know what somebody is really like? Be next to them at the office, or marry them and live with them and be with them 24 hours a day, 7 long days. Truth is, when you do that, you find out that there are some rough edges, aren't there? Rough edges for all of us. You find out that they can't always keep their temper in check 24/7. You find out there's some things that they're working on. But you know what else you find out when you spend that much time with somebody? You find some gems in it. You find some things that nobody else sees, that nobody else notices, that are great qualities because you are around them all the time. Because you have chosen to camp out, you've chosen to tabernacle, you've chosen to pitch your tent with them. And so you, out of everybody else in the world, have the clearest picture of that person that you will ever have, or that anybody will ever have, because you are around them so much and you know them so well. And for better or for worse, you have the clearest picture of what they really are. And it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing that the God of all time would come and choose to pitch his tents among us, among the world, among society once again. That for at another point in history, the God of all creation would come and choose to come near to those that have strayed. Come near to those that have withdrawn from his presence. Come near to those that have said, you know what, I really don't think this is for me. But he did. He did. Let's pray together this morning. Oh, Father, really the most amazing miracle I think of Christmas is not the virgin birth. It's not how the star got to where it needed to go. It's not how the shepherds followed or how the Magi came. Lord, the most amazing part about Christmas, the biggest miracle, is how you came once again to live amongst us. So that we might have, the people living in your time and us through the pages of the New Testament, we might have the clearest picture of what God is like that we could ever have, because it is through Jesus that we know our Heavenly Father. Lord, thank you for that. Thank you that you humbled yourself. Thank you that you put aside all the things that would go with the territory of a king to come and to live amongst us. That we might know you, and that through you we might find salvation. We ask these things in your name this day. Amen. We're singing again this morning. So I invite you to stand together.